My mother, the narcissist, loved to frighten me. She was an energy vampire, and my pain was her fuel. I kept giving and giving until I began to see the truth, then I just stopped. My name is Georgia, and this is my story. There's an old idea about a woman who gets bitten by a snake, and instead of tending to the wound, she goes looking for the snake. Not to kill it, just to ask it, calmly, why? As if the snake owed her an explanation it was capable of giving, as if venom came with a reason attached, and if she found the right explanation, the bite might unhappen. I spent 31 years chasing the snake. I want to start with the porch light, because that's where this really begins, even though the light itself doesn't show up in this story until much later. It's a motion sensor light my mother installed over her back door the year I turned 6. The same year she used to sit me on her lap and read to me every night, brush my hair 100 strokes because she'd read somewhere that was good for a child, tell people in the grocery store that I was going to do something extraordinary with my life. That light burned every night that year. I didn't know yet what it meant that a mother could love you like weather, total, consuming, and then simply gone, replaced by a different season with no announcement that the first one had ended. By the time I was 7, the brushing had stopped. The lap was gone. My mother's attention became a thing I had to earn back, and I never quite worked out the terms. When I was 11, we had a dog named Scout. Beagle mix, one ear that never stood upright no matter how many times my father taped it, which he did for a while and then stopped, the way he stopped a lot of things once they became inconvenient. Scout slept outside my door most nights, curled against the baseboard, and some mornings I'd wake up and find he'd shifted in the night until he was pressed right against the crack under the door, as close to me as the house would physically allow. I understood that, even at 11, as a kind of loyalty nobody else in the house had offered me. I didn't have the words for it then. I just knew that the dog had made a choice, every single night, and the choice was me. One Saturday, I came home from a friend's house and Scout was gone. The gate was open, not ajar, open, swung all the way back on its hinge, and I remember standing in the yard calling his name in a voice that got higher every time, the particular pitch of a child who already knows, somewhere underneath the hoping, that calling isn't going to bring anything back. My mother came out onto the step and watched me for a moment before she said anything. She said the wind must have caught the gate. I remember looking at her and then looking at the sky, which was flat and still, and even at 11 I understood there hadn't been any wind that week. None. I noticed everything back then because noticing was the only power I had. That gate had a latch that stuck. It took 2 hands and a firm upward pull to work it loose. I'd watched my father wrestle with it 100 times, muttering. Wind didn't open that gate. Something about the flatness in her voice when she said it, no urgency, no matching my panic, told me not to ask the next question, the obvious one, the one a different kind of mother would have already been answering before I could form it. Then how? I spent 3 afternoons making flyers with his picture on them. I remember the specific smell of the photo paper and the glue stick, the way my hand cramped from writing our phone number over and over in block letters so it would be legible from a car. I stapled them to telephone poles in a 2-mile radius, working outward in circles from our house like his absence was a stone I'd dropped, and I was tracking the ripples. My mother helped me pick which photo to use for the flyer. I remember her sitting at the kitchen table holding up 2 pictures, tilting her head side to side, asking which one looked more appealing. The exact words she used, like we were selecting a yearbook photo and not searching for a family dog. I remember feeling, even then, a small wrongness in her tone that I didn't have a name for yet, a kind of pleasant, unhurried calm that had no business being in the room with my panic. She helped me staple the flyers. She drove me to the farther telephone poles herself. She never once, in 3 afternoons, told me to stop. I found out at 19, home from college for the weekend, standing in our elderly neighbor's kitchen while she watered a plant, and mentioned it like old news, like something we'd surely long since talked through as a family, that a truck had hit Scout on the road out front that same Saturday afternoon, and that my parents had known within the hour. known while I was still inside doing homework, known while I noticed the open gate, known while my mother stood on the step telling me about wind that hadn't blown. She said she'd assumed I knew, that everyone on the street had known, that it had been such a shame, and she went back to her watering can while I stood there with a specific kind of vertigo, doing the math on 3 afternoons of flyers, 2 hands' worth of blisters from the staple gun, telephone poles 2 miles out in every direction, all of it performed for an audience that had already known the ending before I'd started. I asked my mother about it once, years later, in my 20s, home for a holiday, the 2 of us alone in the kitchen doing dishes in a silence that felt, for once, like an opening. I asked her carefully, giving her every possible exit. Maybe she hadn't known right away. Maybe my father had kept it from her too. Maybe there was some version of this where she'd only found out later and hadn't known how to tell a grieving child. I watched her face while I asked, half braced for the shame I assumed was coming, or at the very least a flinch, a caught breath, something that would let me know the woman standing at that sink understood what she'd let me carry through a childhood. She dried a plate. She said she didn't remember it that way. Then she smiled, small at the corner of her mouth, there and gone so fast that if I hadn't spent 30 years learning to watch for it, I might have told myself I'd imagined it. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even defensiveness. It was pleased. The same exact smile she'd wear years later, at family gatherings, right after saying something quietly designed to cut me down in front of people who'd never know it had happened. I didn't understand it that day at the sink. I filed it away instead, the way I filed away most things back then, certain that someday, with enough evidence stacked up, I'd finally understand what that smile was for. I want to be careful here because it would be easy to make my mother a monster and leave it there. She wasn't. She was a beloved 7th grade English teacher for 32 years. Former students still send her cards. At her retirement party, a woman cried describing how my mother had believed in her when nobody else did. I stood in the back of that room holding a paper plate of cake I didn't eat, and I understood, maybe for the first time all the way down, that my mother had an infinite capacity for warmth. She simply never once spent it on me. I moved back to town when I was 34. My mother had had a small stroke, nothing catastrophic, but enough to make my father panic call me at midnight, enough to make the phrase, "just for a few weeks, just until she's steady," seem reasonable. I gave up an apartment I loved. I told my job I needed a remote arrangement. I told myself this was temporary, the way you tell yourself a lot of things when you're organizing your whole life around somebody else's need. The few weeks became 6 years. My sister Trisha came on holidays, and sometimes for a Sunday if it didn't conflict with anything. She'd bring a bottle of wine and a bouquet from the grocery store, stay 90 minutes, and leave before dinner needed cleaning up. My mother would walk her to the car every time, standing in the driveway waving until Trisha's taillights disappeared, then come back inside and ask me, not unkindly, why I hadn't started the laundry yet. I want to describe something my mother did with her face, because I think you have to see it to understand the shape of my whole childhood. When she was about to say something cruel, really cruel, not just careless, her mouth would go soft and pleasant first, almost gentle. It was the same expression she used when she told her book club how proud she was of Trisha's promotion. The same face, aimed at me, right before she'd say something like, "You know, your sister asked if she should start looking into the house paperwork, just so there's no confusion later." She'd watch my face while she said it. Not the paperwork, my face. That was the whole point of saying it. I baked her a lemon cake for her birthday that year. Her favorite, from a recipe she'd taught me herself when I was 9, one of the good afternoons, flour on both our hands, her laughing at something I don't remember anymore. I brought it over still warm. She took one bite, said it needed more zest, and mentioned that Trisha had sent flowers all the way from her business trip. Wasn't that thoughtful? I want to tell you I stopped believing that a cake could fix anything after that. That would be a lie. I brought her something almost every week for another 2 years. There was a particular sound my mother made when she was truly angry with me. Angrier than the sharp words. Angrier than the silence. She would hum. Not a song exactly. a tuneless, contented little melody drifting through the kitchen while I stood there having just been told something designed to gut me. Her back turned, hands moving through dishes or mail, humming like a woman entirely at peace. It was worse than shouting. Shouting at least admitted something had happened. The humming said, "Nothing happened. You imagined it. And also, I am so at ease right now, and you are not. And isn't that interesting?" The first time I heard it, I was maybe 9. She'd told me, flatly, that I'd embarrassed her in front of a neighbor. I don't even remember what I'd done, something small, a child's small thing, the kind of thing a kinder mother forgets by dinner. I remember the neighbor's name, though, Mrs. Halloran, and I remember standing on our front step watching her retreat down the walk while my mother's hand found my shoulder and steered me back inside with a grip just a shade too firm to be affectionate, and I understood, the way children understand when weather shifts before anyone says a word, that something had gone wrong and it belonged to me now. She didn't yell, because yelling would almost have been a relief. Yelling was a thing I'd seen other kids' parents do, a thing that ended, that you could wait out under a table or behind a door. What she did instead was flatten her voice into something almost conversational and tell me precisely what I'd done and precisely how it had reflected on her, cataloging it the way you'd read off a grocery list, and it was the flatness that undid me before the content even landed. I started crying. The specific, hiccuping, can't-catch-your-breath crying of a 9-year-old who doesn't yet know how to cry quietly, who hasn't learned yet that quiet is safer. And that's when she started humming. She turned to the sink like I'd already left the room. Dishes first, I remember, then the rack, plate after plate transferred in an easy, unhurried rhythm, and under it, threading through the clink of ceramic, this low, tuneless hum. Not a song I recognized, not anything with words, just a warm, private little melody drifting out of her like steam off a stove. Her shoulders were loose. Her back was to me, but I could see it in the line of her, the same loose-shouldered ease she had on good days, on days I hadn't done anything wrong at all. I stood there in socks on the kitchen linoleum, hiccuping, waiting for the part where she turned around, and she never did. She just kept moving through the dishes, humming, entirely, visibly, at peace. I remember thinking, with the strange over-precision children sometimes have in the middle of something they don't understand, she's happy right now, not performing calm to cover her anger, actually unmistakably content, in a kitchen with a crying child 8 feet behind her, and some part of me that was too young to have language for it still understood that the two facts were connected, that my crying and her humming were somehow the same event seen from two sides. I didn't know the word for what I was watching. I only knew that I wanted, badly, for her to stop humming and start yelling instead, because yelling I could have answered. I could have said I'm sorry to yelling. I could have apologized my way out of yelling, the way I'd apologized my way out of trouble with teachers, with friends, with everyone else in my small world who operated on a currency of sorry then forgiven. The humming didn't take currency. The humming wasn't a transaction I'd been invited into at all. I stood there a long time, longer than I needed to probably, but some childish hope kept me rooted, waiting for the tune to break, for her to turn around and confirm that this had cost her something too. It never did. Eventually I just went to my room, because there was nowhere else productive to put myself, and I lay on my bed listening to the faint sound of it still drifting under my door, dishes clinking, that same private little melody, and I remember thinking the thought that would take me another 30 years to fully unpack. Whatever just happened, she won it. I understand it now in ways I didn't have the vocabulary for at 9. The words could always be argued with. I spent years getting good at arguing with them, marshalling evidence, presenting my case like a child lawyer convinced that reason was a language she also spoke. But the humming was never an argument. It didn't ask anything of me, didn't require I agree or disagree, didn't leave any surface for a rebuttal to land on. It simply announced, without a single word, that she was fine, that she would always be fine, and that my devastation was background noise to a woman doing her dishes. You cannot reach a person who has made herself unreachable on purpose. I just didn't know, at 9, that unreachable was a thing a mother could choose to be, on purpose, as a kind of weapon, in her own kitchen, with her own child crying 8 feet behind her. My mother smeared me, too, in ways I didn't find out about until I was nearly 30. A cousin let it slip at a funeral. Something about how my mother used to tell the extended family I'd been a difficult child, always taking, never grateful. Stories with specific fabricated details, a whole invented version of me passed around at gatherings I wasn't invited to defend myself at. When I confronted her, gently, just asking why, she didn't deny it. She looked almost delighted that I'd found out, that same soft, pleased mouth, and said, "Well, you were sensitive. People needed context," as if my reputation were a service she'd performed for the family's convenience. She was, I came to understand much later, not simply difficult. She needed to be adored, constantly and by everyone, the way some people need water. And when the adoration wasn't coming fast enough, she manufactured a supply, usually at my expense, since I was the one child who'd stopped supplying it freely a long time ago. Trisha gave her something different, an audience that never questioned the show. My mother repaid her in kind. Treated Trisha's husband with a warmth she'd never once extended to any partner of mine, praised Trisha's parenting in front of relatives, protected her from ever having to see what the house actually cost to run. I dated 3 people in my 20s who my mother, I now understand, worked quietly to unravel. Not with confrontation, with comments. A concerned aside to a boyfriend about how exhausting I could be to love. A small lie to another about a version of my past he never should have heard. I didn't put it together until my 30s, comparing notes with an aunt who'd watched it happen twice and assumed I'd known. I hadn't. It's a specific kind of vertigo, realizing the person who was supposed to protect you spent years quietly working against you, and you were too busy loving her to notice the current. Once, when I was 36, she hid from me for 2 hours in a grocery store. We'd gone together for my father's birthday dinner. She wandered off toward the bakery and simply didn't come back. I searched every aisle twice. I asked an employee to page her. Eventually, I set an alert on my phone, timed check-ins, the way you'd manage a missing child, except I was a grown woman searching for my 68-year-old mother in a safe way. I found her, finally, sitting in her car in the parking lot, calm, scrolling her phone. She said she'd gotten tired and needed air. She didn't apologize. She watched me while I explained how frightened I'd been, and there it was again, that soft, pleased mouth. She liked frightening me. I don't think she'd have called it that. I don't think she needed to. Here's the part I didn't expect, the part that changed everything, though it took me a long time to understand what had actually happened. I was 41. A project at work had gone sideways, nothing dramatic, just weeks of ordinary, grinding stress, deadlines stacked on deadlines, the kind of stretch where you eat lunch at your desk and stop noticing you're doing it. My mother called on a Tuesday to tell me, in her soft, pleasant voice, that she and Trisha had been discussing the house, and that it made more sense, going forward, for it to go to Trisha, since Trisha had stability, and I'd always been more of a wanderer. This was, by any measure, one of her better shots. She'd clearly been saving it. I could hear the small satisfaction underneath the softness, the pleasure of a line she'd rehearsed. It should have wrecked my whole week. I was so deep in a spreadsheet when she called that the words arrived almost sideways, competing for space with a column of numbers that weren't reconciling, and a Slack notification blinking in the corner of my screen. I remember minimizing the call in my head before I'd even minimized the window, filing it under later the way I'd file a typo I didn't have time to fix yet. Wanderer registered distantly, the way a word registers when you've heard a variation of it for 30 years, and your nervous system has simply stopped issuing the alert. There used to be a version of me who would have set the spreadsheet aside entirely, who would have felt the floor tilt at that word and given it the whole of my attention, because giving it my attention was what it wanted, and I'd never known how to withhold anything she wanted badly enough. That day, I just said, "Okay, that's your decision to make." in the same flat register I'd have used to confirm a delivery window, and got off the phone in under 90 seconds because I had a meeting in 4 minutes and hadn't pulled up the deck yet. I remember minimizing the deck now, not the call. That's what it had been. In real time, a small triage between two demands on my attention, and the meeting won. Not because I'd decided to punish her with indifference, because a client was waiting and she wasn't. I didn't think about it again until I was walking to my car that evening, keys already out, and some part of my brain finally surfaced the sentence in full. It made more sense for it to go to Trisha, the way you notice a bruise hours after you've walked into the doorframe, no pain yet, just the dull recognition that something happened to you earlier and you missed it. I stood there in the parking lot for a second, waiting to feel the old collapse. It didn't come. I felt something closer to mild surprise at its absence, the way you'd pat your pockets for keys you'd already put in your hand. That night I told the story to no one, which was itself new. For years I'd have called someone, my sister, if she'd have picked up, or a friend, or no one in particular, just needing to say the sentence out loud to confirm it had actually happened, and I hadn't imagined the cruelty in it. Instead, I made dinner. I watched half an episode of something I don't remember. I fell asleep before it ended, still faintly aware that I'd been handed a wound that week and had somehow misplaced it before bed. My mother called twice the next day. Then she brought it up again at dinner that weekend, restating it, watching my face for the reaction she hadn't gotten the first time. I still didn't have much to give her. I was tired, not performing calm, actually just tired. And I watched something in her come slightly unmoored. She repeated herself a third time, louder, less soft. She'd expected a wound and gotten a shrug, and it destabilized her more than any argument I'd ever made. That was when I understood, all at once, something that should have been obvious for 30 years. She wasn't trying to communicate information to me. She was trying to produce a reaction. The house, the paperwork, Trisha's stability, none of it was really the point. The point was my face, crumpling, on schedule, so she could feel the particular kind of powerful that only my pain gave her. When I stopped supplying the reaction, even by accident, even just because I was too tired to give it, the whole transaction failed, and she could not tolerate a failed transaction. I started doing it on purpose after that. Not lying, not performing indifference I didn't feel, just declining to hand her the response she was fishing for. Okay, that's your decision. That sounds like something you and Trisha should work out. Flat, calm, unremarkable sentences. It cost me something every time in the moment, the old fear that if I didn't defend myself, she'd take my silence as proof of guilt. But I noticed each time the same thing happening to her that I'd seen after the spreadsheet call. A small unraveling, a raised voice trying to locate the wound and not finding it, the humming arriving faster and angrier as if volume could substitute for effect. I need to be honest about what came before my leaving, because I didn't walk out the first time it would have made sense to. I tried for a while asking Trisha to do more. I called her, laid it out plainly, the doctor's appointments, the meals, the 2 years I hadn't taken a full week of vacation because there was no one else to watch our mother. Trisha listened, said that sounded hard, and then explained she really couldn't, with the kids' schedules, and could we talk about it another time. We never did. I tried waiting for my father. He'd stand in the doorway during the worst of it, the humming, the smearing, the grocery store afternoon, and say things like, "You know how she gets," or "She doesn't mean it like that," a lifetime of translating her cruelty into whether nobody could be blamed for. I kept some private hope, longer than I'd like to admit, that he'd eventually stand between us. He never did. I understood eventually that he wasn't going to, that he'd built 40 years of peace on the condition of never seeing what I saw, and I couldn't be the one to cost him that. I tried reducing my hours at her house instead of my presence in her life, showing up less, staying briefer, telling myself this counted as a boundary. She noticed within a week and escalated to match it. Calls at odd hours, a hurt voicemail about how she guessed she'd just have to manage alone, a comment to a family friend about how neglected she felt. Reducing my hours only sharpened her aim. It didn't change the game. Each time I tried one of these, some part of me was hoping it would work, so that the version of the story where I simply left could stay hypothetical. Leaving felt, for years, like something I couldn't survive being blamed for. I could already hear it, from cousins, from her friends, from strangers at the retirement party who only knew the woman the students loved, a daughter abandoning her aging mother. Nobody would ask what 40 years had actually looked like from where I stood. They'd only see me walking away, and her alone, humming in an empty kitchen, and I'd be the villain in a story I hadn't written. But I kept coming back to something simple, turning it over on the drive home some nights. I was setting myself on fire, slowly, to keep a woman warm who had never once done the same for me. So instead of leaving all at once, I did what felt survivable. I started the fade. I told her I could come Tuesdays instead of every day. I said it plainly over the phone, no apology built into the sentence, which was itself a kind of departure. For years I'd delivered any reduction in my availability wrapped in 3 layers of guilt, pre-softened before she could even react to it. This time I just said it. Tuesdays. I didn't need to explain that I'd been coming 6 days a week for 2 years. I didn't explain anything. There was a pause on the line, the kind she used to fill with the humming. But we weren't in the same room. So instead, I just heard her breathing shift. Then, well, I suppose I'll manage. I reminded her she had Trisha's number, since Trisha lived only 40 minutes further out than I did, and told my mother that Trisha might be a better first call now for anything that wasn't urgent, a prescription refill, a grocery run, the small daily maintenance of a life I'd been quietly absorbing for 6 years without either of them noticing it had a cost. I said it the way you'd mention any practical detail, a scheduling note, nothing loaded in it. She didn't respond to that part at all. She let it sit there, unacknowledged, the way she'd always let inconvenient facts sit unacknowledged until they either went away or someone else was forced to say them twice. I stopped answering on the first ring. This sounds like a small thing, and for 30 years I'd have told you it was. But the first ring, for her, had always meant something. It meant I was standing by. It meant her calling was an event I dropped things for. I let it go to 2 rings, sometimes 3, sometimes to voicemail entirely if I was in the middle of something and it wasn't urgent, and I could hear, in the slight edge that crept into her voice when I finally picked up, that she'd noticed the new interval and didn't like what it implied about where I'd ranked her. I stopped explaining myself when I couldn't make it to something. No more elaborate accounts of work deadlines or traffic or the appointment that ran long. Just, I can't make it Thursday, and nothing after it. No scaffolding of justification for her to climb up and pick apart. She used to be able to find the seam in an explanation and work her fingers into it, some detail that didn't quite track, some inconsistency to seize on as proof I was lying or didn't care. Take away the explanation and there's no seam left to find. Just a fact, flat, with nowhere to get purchase. When she brought up the house again, same script, same soft opening about being realistic and Trisha's stability. I said evenly, whatever you and Trisha decide is between the 2 of you. I meant it entirely, not performed calm, not gritted teeth calm, actual indifference to an outcome I'd spent years being wounded by on command. I could hear, in the silence that followed, that this landed nothing like she'd expected. There was nothing in my sentence left to fight. No wound to press on, no fear to twist, no daughter standing there needing the house to mean she was loved. Just a woman agreeing, mildly, that it was her decision to make. She complained, of course. She always complained when a tool stopped working. It just took her a while to recognize this one had. First she called me selfish, testing whether the word still had its old weight. It didn't land the way it used to. I said, maybe, and let the conversation move on. And I could feel her recalibrating on the other end, trying a different key in the same lock. A week later, her new word was unkind, a slightly heavier accusation, delivered with a hurt little catch in her voice she'd perfected over 40 years of practice on an audience that used to always flinch. I didn't flinch. Then, because there was nothing left in the drawer but the oldest tool she owned, she reminded me she wasn't going to be around forever, and didn't I want to make the most of the time we had left? her voice gone thin and trembling in a way that would have destroyed me at 20, at 30, even at 40. I said I hoped she felt supported and that Trisha was there now for the bigger things. I felt something saying this, some old reflex screaming that I'd just handed her a knife by refusing to bleed for her, that indifference would surely provoke something worse. It didn't. It just provoked more of the same, aimed harder, landing softer, a diminishing return she couldn't seem to stop chasing even as it stopped paying out. Over that year, I watched the humming change. It used to arrive slow and confident, a woman thoroughly enjoying herself, in no hurry, because she knew the silence would do its work regardless. Now it came faster, louder, almost frantic in the moments right after one of my flat, ordinary, non-reactions, as if volume were a substitute for effect, as if humming harder might reach a version of me that had stopped being reachable that way at all. It was, I noticed, a song being played to a room the audience had already left. She just hadn't looked up yet to notice the seats were empty. By the time I told her I was moving 3 states away, a real move, an apartment signed, a job transferred, she didn't cry. She asked flatly who was going to take her to her appointments. I told her Trisha had already agreed to look into it. She hadn't, not really, but I wasn't going to spend one more year managing the truth of that on her behalf. I left on a Thursday in March. My father hugged me at the car and said quietly that he understood, which was the closest thing to protection he'd ever offered me, and came about 30 years too late to matter the way it might have. I think about the porch light sometimes, the one from when I was 6, still burning most nights, I'd guess, though I haven't seen it in over a year. I don't miss my mother's house. I don't miss the smell of her kitchen or the sound of her key in the door or the particular ache of hoping, every single visit, that this might be the day she looked at me the way she used to look at the 7th graders in her classroom. I don't mourn the version of her everyone else got to have, the beloved teacher, the doting grandmother to Trisha's kids, because I never had access to that woman anyway. You can't lose something you were never given. What I do still carry, quietly without much ceremony, is the 6-year-old on her lap, the 100 brushstrokes, the woman who once looked at me like I was extraordinary before she decided I wasn't allowed to be. I don't think that year was fake exactly. I think it was simply the only season she had in her, and it passed, the way weather does, and never came back around. I let myself keep that memory without waiting for it to return. It doesn't owe me a sequel. I still, if I'm honest, feel a flicker of guilt writing this down. The old reflex that says a daughter doesn't get to say no to her own mother, that somewhere a chorus of well-meaning people is already forming the sentence, but she's your mother, though. I've stopped waiting for that guilt to fully leave. I've just stopped organizing my life around it. Scout never got a proper burial. No stone, no marked patch of yard, nothing to visit, just a truck on a road and a truth withheld until I was old enough to have already grieved him wrong, grieved him as a mystery instead of a loss. For a long time I thought that meant I didn't get to grieve him again, that the window for it had closed sometime around age 19 in a neighbor's kitchen over a watering can. It was 4 months after I moved to the new apartment 3 states away that I finally let myself walk into the animal shelter. I hadn't planned it. I'd gone out for coffee on a Saturday and passed a converted storefront with a hand-lettered sign in the window, a photo of a hound mix taped beside it, and something in my chest just turned around and walked me through the door before I'd decided anything. The woman at the desk asked if I had a particular breed in mind. I said no. She asked if I had a particular age, size, temperament. I said I honestly didn't know, and she smiled like that was the right answer and led me back through the rows of runs. I found her at the end, in the last kennel, a scruffy, brindle-coated mutt with one ear that stood at attention and one that folded over at the tip, asleep with her chin on her paws until she heard my footsteps and lifted her head just enough to watch me without getting up. Not begging, not performing, just watching, deciding something about me in real time. The card on her kennel said she'd been surrendered twice already, that she was reserved with strangers, that she took time to trust. I crouched down outside the wire. She didn't come to me. She just kept looking, steady, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world to figure out whether I was worth the risk. I wanted to name her something meaningful right away, something that tied back, some quiet echo of Scout. I didn't. I sat with that for a long time, actually, worried that whatever name I chose would either honor him or betray him, and I couldn't work out which. In the end, I named her Junie, after nothing, after no one, because it was the first name that came to me that didn't belong to any part of my old life. She wasn't a replacement. I was careful about that, more careful than I've been about almost anything else. Scout had been a child's whole heart, offered nightly at a door, taken from me by people who then made me hunt for the truth for 8 more years. Junie was going to be something else entirely, something that started clean. It took her 5 months to sleep anywhere near me. She spent the first few weeks in the far corner of the living room, watching the door more than she watched me, flinching at sounds I didn't understand the history of and never would. I didn't push it. I'd had enough people push me toward trust I wasn't ready to give, and I wasn't going to do that to her. I just kept showing up the same way, every day, predictable. No love bombing, no vanishing act, no test she had to pass to earn the next kind thing. Just the same woman, at the same times, doing the same undramatic acts of care over and over, until one night in the 6th month I woke up and she was pressed against my side, her whole weight against my ribs, breathing slow. After that, she didn't leave me. Not in the house, not in the yard, not when a delivery driver knocked too loud, and she put her whole body between me and the door before I'd even registered the sound. She's protective in a way that has nothing anxious in it. Steady, watchful, the kind of loyalty that doesn't need to announce itself because it's simply always in the room. And I've learned I'm the same, back at her. I notice when she's off before she shows it. I've sat on the kitchen floor with her through 2 thunderstorms because I wasn't going to let her ride out fear alone in a corner, the way I once rode out plenty of things alone in corners of my own. Neither of us learned this anywhere in the houses we came from. That's what strikes me some nights, watching her sleep against the door, the way Scout used to sleep against mine. That loyalty like this has to be built fresh, from nothing, between 2 creatures who'd never once seen it modeled and had to invent it from scratch. Nobody taught either of us this. We're just 2 things that got left, in our different ways, choosing now, every day, not to leave each other. I still think about Scout sometimes, the mystery I chased for 8 years, the flyers on telephone poles 2 miles out. I've stopped needing it to have meant something. It didn't need a burial to be real, and Junie didn't need to replace him to matter. She just needed the door open, and the patience to wait outside it until I was ready to let something in that wouldn't disappear on a Saturday and lie to me about the wind. As for the rest of my life, I'm not going to tell you things resolved into some tidy piece. They didn't. They just stopped being mine to carry every day. Life, it turns out, doesn't begin the day you win the argument. It begins the day you stop needing to. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe.